He thought he could forget you. He truly believed distance would do what love could not. He thought silence would weaken the connection. He thought time would slowly erase your presence from his mind, until one day your name would no longer carry weight in his chest. So he pulled away. He became colder, more distant, more controlled. On the outside, it may have even looked like he was moving on. Maybe he stopped reaching out. Maybe he stopped showing emotion. Maybe he made you feel as if what existed between you was never as deep as you believed. But last night, something changed. Something broke through every wall he spent so long building. And if you have felt an unusual heaviness in your heart lately, if you have suddenly found yourself thinking about him more than usual, if something inside you keeps whispering that this connection is not over, then this message may be for you. Because sometimes the deepest emotional shifts happen in silence. No phone call, no message, no explanation. Just an invisible movement inside the soul. Carl Jung believed that what we bury in the unconscious does not disappear. It waits. It grows stronger in darkness. And eventually, it returns. That is exactly what happened to him. For a long time, he tried to convince himself that what he felt for you was manageable. He gave it logical explanations. He told himself he was just attached, just lonely, just emotional. He minimized what his heart knew because accepting the truth felt dangerous, because the truth would demand something from him. It would force him to feel vulnerable, and vulnerability was the one thing he spent years protecting himself from. You need to understand something about emotionally guarded people. They do not run because they feel nothing. They run because they feel too much. This is what most people misunderstand. When someone becomes distant after a deep connection, people assume the feelings disappeared. But often, the opposite is true. The feelings became too powerful to control, too real to ignore, too frightening to face, and that may have been his deepest struggle with you, because you touched something inside him that he had carefully kept hidden for years, maybe even decades. A part of him that longed for closeness but feared surrender, a part that wanted love but also feared being consumed by it. Jung often spoke about the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we suppress because they feel unsafe. Sometimes love awakens the shadow, not because love is dangerous, but because love exposes what we are trying hardest to hide. You did that without even trying. Maybe it was the way you saw through him. Maybe it was the way you sensed things he never said aloud. Maybe it was how safe he felt around you, and how terrifying that safety became. Because when someone has spent their life surviving through emotional control, real intimacy feels almost unbearable. Being truly seen can feel more frightening than being rejected, so he chose distance. Distance gave him an illusion of power. It allowed him to believe he was in control again. If he stayed away, he would stop feeling. If he avoided emotional closeness, he would regain balance. If he ignored the pull toward you, eventually his heart would obey his mind. At least, that is what he told himself. But the unconscious does not obey logic. That is the strange thing about love. You can silence words, you can avoid contact, you can disappear physically. But if the emotional bond is real, the inner world keeps moving. Feelings continue beneath the surface, memories remain alive, emotional energy keeps flowing, even when both people say nothing. And last night, that buried energy rose. Maybe it happened in a dream. Dreams are powerful because they bypass the ego. During the day, he can maintain control, he can suppress emotions, he can distract himself with work, routines, responsibilities, pride, and denial. But at night, the defenses weaken, the unconscious speaks, and what the conscious mind rejects often returns in dreams with devastating clarity. Perhaps he saw you, not just as a memory, but as a feeling. Perhaps he felt your presence so vividly that for a moment it no longer felt like imagination. Maybe he saw your eyes, heard your voice, felt the warmth of the connection he had been trying so hard to escape. Maybe he relived a moment between you that his mind pretended to forget, but his heart preserved perfectly. And something inside him cracked. Because the truth he spent so long resisting suddenly became impossible to deny. He misses you. Not casually, not occasionally, deeply, in ways his pride never allowed him to admit. This is where things become psychologically intense. When someone suppresses love, The emotion doesn't simply disappear. It transforms. Sometimes it becomes irritation, sometimes numbness, sometimes emotional withdrawal, sometimes obsession. The energy must go somewhere. Jung understood that repressed emotions seek expression, if not through conscious honesty, then through symptoms, behavior, dreams, anxiety, and emotional unrest. That may explain what has been happening to him recently. Maybe he has been feeling restless without understanding why. Maybe small things trigger emotional reactions he cannot explain. Maybe he feels unusually empty, despite being surrounded by distractions. Maybe nothing satisfies him the way it used to. He may tell himself life is normal, but internally, something feels off. That something is often unresolved love, because real emotional bonds do not end simply because communication stops. And here is the painful part. He may have genuinely believed he was doing the right thing by staying away. Some people withdraw not because they do not care, but because they fear hurting the person they love. Sometimes they carry guilt, sometimes shame, sometimes unresolved wounds from the past. They believe distance is protection. They think, if I stay away, they will heal. If I leave, I cannot damage them further. But love does not disappear through sacrifice. It often grows in absence. And absence has a cruel way of revealing truth. When you no longer have access to someone's presence, you begin to understand their importance. The routines you once took for granted become sacred memories. The voice you could once hear anytime becomes a haunting silence. The emotional comfort they brought becomes painfully obvious only after it is gone. That realization may have finally reached him. Last night may have been the moment his emotional defenses stopped working, the moment distraction failed, the moment logic failed, the moment denial failed, and beneath all of it, there was you, still there, still living inside the places he could never fully close. You see, when a man shares a deep emotional bond and then suppresses it, he often enters internal conflict. One side says, move on. Another says, go back. One side protects the ego. Another longs for connection. One side values control. Another craves surrender. That battle becomes exhausting, and eventually, one side begins to win. But here is the mystery. Why last night? Why now? Why after all this time? Because transformation often happens when the soul reaches its limit. There comes a point where suppressing truth becomes more painful than facing it. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That is powerful, because many people think fate is something external. But often fate is simply the truth inside you demanding recognition. He may be reaching that point now. A threshold, a breaking point, an awakening. Because something about last night forced him to feel what he had been avoiding, and once someone truly feels that buried love again, they cannot unfeel it. That is the part many people do not understand. Love can go quiet, it can go underground, it can become hidden, but real emotional connection rarely dies cleanly, especially when there were things left unsaid, especially when both hearts felt more than words could express, especially when distance was chosen before emotional truth was fully spoken. That creates unfinished emotional energy, and unfinished emotional energy always seeks closure. Not necessarily through reunion, but through truth. And perhaps that truth is getting louder inside him now. Maybe he is replaying everything, the moments he pushed you away, the moments he stayed silent when he wanted to speak, the times his fear won over his heart, the pain he caused by pretending not to care. Regret is strange. It rarely arrives immediately. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes pride delays it. Sometimes ego numbs it. But once regret enters fully, it changes everything. Because regret forces honesty, and honesty can be devastating, especially when the truth is this: he never stopped feeling, he just stopped expressing. There is a huge difference. And if you have been blaming yourself, wondering if you imagined the connection, questioning whether you meant anything to him, hear this carefully. Silence is not always absence of love. Distance is not always rejection. Sometimes silence is emotional paralysis. Sometimes distance is fear. Sometimes the person who looks the coldest is fighting the deepest inner storm. But there is still something you do not see yet, something even deeper than longing. Because what changed last night was not only that he missed you, it was something far more life-changing. For the first time, he may have realized why he ran in the first place. And when that realization fully lands, nothing inside him will remain the same. Because the real reason he pulled away was never just about you. It was about the version of himself he became whenever love felt real. And last night, he finally saw that version clearly for the first time in his life, because he finally saw something painful. He saw the pattern, not just with you, but within himself. He saw how every time love began to feel real, he pulled back. Every time someone came close enough to touch the parts of him he kept hidden, something inside him panicked. He would create distance, become harder to reach, emotionally disappear, or convince himself that leaving was the safest choice. For years he may have blamed circumstances, timing, other people, even fate. But last night, the illusion cracked. For the first time he could no longer blame anything outside himself. He saw that the greatest barrier to love had always been fear. Not fear of you, fear of being seen, fear of needing someone, fear of losing control, fear of surrendering the identity he spent years building, the strong one, the self-sufficient one, the one who never needed too much and never asked for too much. The identity that protected him from pain also protected him from intimacy. And suddenly, he understood the cost of that protection. It cost him you. That realization did not arrive gently. It hit him like truth often does, quietly at first, then all at once. Maybe he sat in silence longer than usual. Maybe sleep would not come. Maybe his chest felt heavy with emotions he could no longer intellectualize. Maybe memories returned with unbearable clarity. Not just the beautiful moments, but the painful ones too. The moments he withheld affection, the moments he ignored what his heart wanted to say, the moments he let fear make decisions love should have made. And something inside him broke open, not in weakness, in honesty. There comes a moment in psychological transformation when the ego can no longer defend its old story. Jung described this as confronting the shadow, not the dark monster people imagine, but the rejected truth within us. The truth we avoid because accepting it would change everything. He had spent so long telling himself, "I left because it was necessary." But last night, another voice became louder. "No, you left because you were afraid. Afraid of how deeply you loved. Afraid of how deeply you were loved. Afraid that if you surrendered, you could be hurt in ways you might never recover from." And once that truth surfaced, all the emotional distance he created began to look different. He started seeing your pain, not abstractly, not intellectually, emotionally. He began to understand what his silence may have felt like to you. The confusion, the overthinking, the ache of trying to understand someone who felt everything deeply, yet said so little. He may have realized how often you carried emotional weight he helped create, how often you questioned your worth because he could not face his own emotions, and regret deepened. But something even more profound happened. Regret transformed into longing. Because once defenses fall, love no longer has walls to hide behind. This is where many people misunderstand emotional awakening. They think awakening means instant action, a message, a call, a confession. Sometimes it does. But often, the first thing awakening brings is emotional intensity, raw, overwhelming feeling. Before action comes emotional reckoning. That may be where he is now, feeling everything, the love, the loss, the guilt, the longing, the truth. And if you are wondering whether someone can truly feel all of this after so much silence, the answer is yes. Sometimes silence amplifies feeling. When words disappear, emotions grow louder inside. When contact ends, inner connection can intensify, especially when the bond touched something sacred. That word matters, sacred, because not every connection changes a person. Some relationships are lessons, some are comfort, some are temporary. But some connections act like mirrors. They force you to meet yourself. They reveal wounds you ignored, needs you denied, and truths you buried. They awaken dormant parts of the soul. They change how you see love, pain, intimacy, and even your own identity. These connections are not always easy. In fact, They are often the most painful, but they are transformative. You may have been that mirror for him, and mirrors are difficult to love because they reflect everything, not just beauty, wounds too, not just desire, fear too, not just longing, shame too. He may have loved you deeply while simultaneously resisting everything you awakened in him. That inner contradiction created the push and pull you felt. One moment warmth, one moment distance, one moment emotional closeness, the next silence. It was never random, it was conflict, and last night that conflict began collapsing. Because eventually, the soul grows tired of war. It becomes exhausted by avoidance. It reaches for truth, and truth, when it arrives, strips away illusion. Here is the deepest truth he may now be facing. For all the ways he tried to forget you, he never truly wanted to. Read that again in your heart. Sometimes people say they want to move on because they want relief from emotional intensity, not because they want the person gone. He may have wanted freedom from vulnerability, confusion, longing, and emotional dependence. But wanting freedom from emotional pain is not the same as wanting freedom from love. That distinction changes everything. Because it means his battle was never truly against you. It was against what loving you demanded from him. Growth, surrender, honesty, emotional maturity. And those things are hard, especially for someone who learned survival through emotional suppression. But here is where this message becomes about you too. Because while his transformation matters, yours matters just as much. You may have spent so much energy trying to decode him that you forgot to return to yourself. You may have measured your worth by his presence or absence. You may have asked painful questions in the dark. Was it real? Did he care? Did I imagine everything? Why did he pull away if the connection felt so deep? Those questions can consume the heart. But healing begins when you stop making someone else's fear a reflection of your value. His inability to love openly was never proof that you were unlovable. It was proof that he was wounded. There is a difference, a huge difference. Someone can love you deeply and still fail to show up properly. That truth hurts because love alone does not guarantee emotional readiness. And yet, love still matters because love leaves marks on the soul. You left one on his. That is why forgetting you failed. That is why last night mattered. Because whatever he buried is alive again. But now comes the most important question. What happens next? This is where many hearts become restless. They want certainty. Will he return? Will he reach out? Will he confess? Will this lead to reunion? Maybe, maybe not. And I know that may feel frustrating to hear. But the deepest lesson here is not about controlling his next move. It is about understanding what real connection teaches you. Real connection teaches patience, discernment, self-respect, emotional truth. It teaches you not to chase someone into emotional readiness. Transformation cannot be forced. No amount of longing can heal someone unwilling to face themselves. That work is theirs, not yours. And if last night truly changed something inside him, his next steps must come from genuine inner change, not temporary emotion, guilt, or loneliness. Real transformation shows through behavior, through consistency, through courage, through honesty, not just feeling. Feeling is the beginning. Action reveals integration. Jung believed that becoming whole requires conscious integration of the parts we once rejected. If he truly faced his shadow last night, then he has begun a powerful inner journey. But awakening is only the first step. Living differently is the real challenge. And perhaps this is why life created distance, not to punish either of you, but to transform both of you. Distance sometimes becomes sacred space, a place where illusions die, a place where false identities crack, a place where love is purified. You needed to learn that your love is valuable, even when not fully received. He needed to learn that love cannot be controlled without cost. Both lessons matter, and maybe, just maybe, this story is not ending. Maybe it is evolving. Maybe the silence was never the end. Maybe it was the space required for emotional truth to emerge. Or maybe this connection came to awaken something essential in both of you, whether or not paths reunite physically. Because sometimes the greatest gift of love is not possession, it is transformation. And I want you to hear this deeply. If he returns, let it be to a version of you that no longer abandons herself for love. Let it be to someone grounded, someone emotionally wise, someone who understands that being deeply loved should never require losing self-respect. And if he does not return, let this truth still free you. What you felt was real. You did not imagine the connection. You were not foolish for loving deeply. You were not too much. You were powerful enough to awaken something life-changing inside another soul. That matters, more than you realize. Because some people spend entire lifetimes never feeling a connection strong enough to challenge their defenses. You did that. Your presence became a catalyst, and catalysts change things forever. Even if transformation happens slowly, even if pride delays action, even if silence still lingers for a little longer. Something changed last night. Trust that. Somewhere, beyond words, beyond pride, beyond fear, truth has started moving. And truth has a strange way of finding expression. Sooner or later, what is real seeks light. So if your heart has been feeling something shifting lately, if you have sensed movement in the unseen, if your intuition keeps whispering that something is changing, you may not be imagining it. Because hearts connected at depth often feel shifts before the mind understands them. Stay open, but stay rooted. Stay hopeful, but stay whole. Let love be something that expands you, not something that breaks you. And remember this beautiful truth: the person who was meant to love you deeply will eventually have to choose between fear and love. No one can avoid that choice forever. Not him, not anyone. And if last night truly brought him face to face with himself, then for the first time, he may finally understand what he almost lost: you. And sometimes, that realization becomes the very beginning of everything changing. Not because fate forces love, but because truth makes hiding impossible. And once someone stops hiding from themselves, they stop hiding from love too.